getting very good turnouts on YouTube. And I do know that the virus is, much more transmissible now, but we're taking all the precautions. But please, wear your masks, cover your noses, which is part of the, your air that you take in the virus. And I want to remind the people watching at home that if they want to follow along with the text, because we're going to do a very informal text study tonight, so it's nice that we're an intimate group, you can click on the description at the bottom of the video and it will pop right up, but you don't need to, because I'm also going to read all the readings clearly. So what did I do with the readings? Arthur, you have those? Okay. Did everybody get one already? Oh, he's been handing them out. Wait, he's trained better than I thought he was. Okay. We're going to start with the first reading on slide number 1. This is the promise of Shabbat. After noise, we seek quiet. After crowds of indifferent strangers, we seek to touch those we love. After concentration on work and responsibility, we seek freedom to meditate, listening to our inward selves. We open our eyes to the hidden beauties and the infinite possibilities in the world that we are creating. We break open the gates of the reservoirs of goodness and kindness in ourselves and in others. We reach toward one beautiful moment of repose as we kindle the Shabbat lights. I'd like to invite Sarah Markowitz to light our Shabbat candles.
Baruch haor ba'olam, Baruch haor ba'adam, Baruch haor ba'shalom, ba'shalom, Baruch haor, Baruch haor, Shabbat.
Our readers tonight are Kathy Radner, Lonnie Fleischer, Susie Friedman, Ann Seifer, Marty Bernstein, and Fran Shore. We begin with Kathy, slide number 3.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
When we meet each other on Shabbat, we think of Shalom, peace. It's right there in the greeting. Shabbat has always been a symbol of peace. Our ancestors called it a taste of the world to come. The peace that they sought to create on Shabbat teased them with hopes that such calm might one day prevail throughout the world. Perhaps it was just a fantasy, but it gave them comfort. Nonetheless, today we understand that if we desire such a world, it must come through our own work. Perhaps Shabbat can remind us of that. Shabbat Shalom. May we all enjoy a Sabbath of peace.
Lechu v'nelcha, lechu v'nelcha. משכנותיך ישראל. מה טובו, אוהליך יעקב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך
Shabbat Shalom, y'all.
Shabbat shalom, y'all.
Y'all. As one of our forebears, we affirm that righteousness and enlightenment shall be our torch. We shall teach these values diligently to our children all the days of our lives. We shall endeavor to live by these values in the comfort of our homes or on cold and windswept roads. Whether adversity bows our heads or fulfillment makes our spirits soar, our hands shall mete out justice to all, and our eyes shall be open to the light of truth. We shall emblazon our paths through life with this light as a beacon for all humanity. Rabbi Eva Goldinger.
My strength is in me, and in you, and in you.
Shabbat Shalom. Therefore, we strive to lead loving, compassionate lives with our heart, with our wisdom, and with our actions. These words which we inscribe in our innermost heart, we aspire to practice them day and night, teaching them diligently to our children, through our words and especially through our deeds, so that the next generations learn to revere and celebrate life.
There's a place with answers we are seeking. There's a place to find our light of hope. Where's the strength to realize our vision? Yesh makom betocheinu. Yesh makom betocheinu. Look within yourself, you'll find it there. There's a place with wisdom that can guide us. There's a place where we know what's right or wrong. Where's the path to peace that we all long for? Yesh makom betocheinu. Yesh makom betocheinu. Look within yourself, you'll find it there.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Don't merely expect to find or to believe that life is worthwhile. Make it worthwhile. Don't merely see life whole. Make it whole. Not knowing which should come first, to improve oneself or to improve the world, we end up doing neither. Actually, the only way to improve the world is by improving oneself, and the only way to improve oneself is by improving the world.
על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, העולם עומד. על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, העולם עומד. על האמת ועל הדין ועל השלום על הדין ועל האמת ועל השלום
If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations,
There must be peace in the cities.
and if there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. And if there is to be peace between neighbors,
There must be
peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home,
There must be peace in the heart.
נעשה שלום שלום בעולם, נעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל העולם, ואמרו שלום. נעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל העולם, ואמרו שלום. נעשה שלום שלום בעולם, נעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל העולם, ואמרו שלום.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, and those who have been wronged. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and to their loved ones: Joe Gaden, Ruth E. Goldman, Max Lark, Rabbi Peter Schweitzer, and Deborah Luria. If there's someone whom you're thinking about, to whom you'd extend well wishes, please go ahead. We'll start over here. Anybody? Oh, anybody on this side? We're good. Everybody's healthy. Oh, Sandy. Ruthie came home today. I talked to her 2 days ago. She said she was. So that's good. I'm glad she did. Fantastic. Good. I was hoping you were going to give us bad news about someone. It was great news. So happy for her. May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly, and may they experience a complete recovery, a refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
מקום הכוח בתוכנו, מקורות הברכה source of strength that dwells so deep within us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Shalom. מקורות הברכה מחברותינו. Bless those in need of healing, no refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. You can shed tears that they are gone, or you can smile because they have lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see her, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember them and only that they are gone, or you can cherish their memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what they would want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on.
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, we continue to mourn the recent death of congregant Edward Broida, Zichro Livracha. And we observe the yard sites this week of Patricia Becker, Patty, Charles Bonet, Jacob Abraham Citron, Clara Cohen, Marilyn Dorfman, Stanley Dorfman, Herman Gaden, Claire Gertier, Doris Lee, Dora Lee, Goldman, Vivian Rose Hager, Joseph Kahn, Jack Keller, Earl Lapp, Esther Levin, Harold Luria, Shirley Malinsky, Michael Muroff, Lorraine Pivnik, and Nathan Saginaw. If there's someone whom you're remembering tonight whose name you'd like to share, please do so. Marty. Oh, her name should have been added. Thank you. Enid Grauer, a congregant who died recently. Thank you. Anybody else? Yehi zichram livracha. May memories of them provide a blessing. As each time we think of them, they come back to life for us and bring us a moment of comfort. If you can do so comfortably, please rise for our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. We read together. Nit gadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the world even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each in our own way take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, May it be so. Please be seated. I'm going to move down there. I don't think I'm going to move down there in one fell swoop. We are, I am told, getting a new sound system here. But I can't make any promises because it's not my department. Okay. Somebody told me this looked like Bob Barker's mic from the Price is Right. That's nothing. That's not important. Okay. So I know some of you asked, why aren't I doing the thing that I was going to do this week? And I'm going to tell you why, because I couldn't take it anymore. Just as simple as that. I needed a week off. I'm tired of dealing with these beep. These beep. Just can't do it anymore. They're sitting there, and where are they this week? In Texas now, with Viktor Orban, the guy who doesn't want the mixed races. This is where we're heading in this country, folks. So, yeah, anyway, I just couldn't do it. So I took a little break this week, and I noticed on the calendar a holiday we don't really celebrate. Well, nobody celebrates it, but we don't really talk about very much in humanistic Judaism. And I thought, you know what? It's a good opportunity for us to talk about Tisha B'Av, or as you may have heard it with the more Yiddish pronunciation, Tisha B'Av. This is a very important fast, and tonight, in fact, it is the 9th of Av, which is what the holiday's name means. Tonight is the 9th of Av, but the fast of Av, the fast of the month of Av, of the 9th of Av, will not take place until tomorrow night and Sunday. And that's because you don't fast on Shabbat in mourning. Now, you do fast on Shabbat for Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is the Sabbath of Sabbaths according to the Torah. I don't fast at all on either of the holidays, but certainly my family members do. And so, and it is the hardest fast of the year, I will tell you. When I was traditional, it was a nightmare, because it's not a non-working day. And it is the only one of two of the full fasts. What do I mean by full fast? Starts at sunset and ends after sundown. Not sunset, but sundown. That's 25 hours, just like Yom Kippur. But you're not in synagogue praying. There are traditions, and we'll talk about a few of them, but it's a work day for a lot of people. Or if it's not a work day, sometimes it maybe makes it go longer. So it's a really miserable, and it's August, when the sun doesn't set until, well, here, midnight. But what are the origins of this day? Where does it come from? So this has become, for close to 1800, 1900 years now, the major day of mourning in Judaism. In fact, it is so important that there were customs that said you couldn't mourn in this fashion on other days, and there was a lot of conflict in Israel when they declared what was a date associated with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to be Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. Because the Holocaust, by many communities, is remembered on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. And in fact, in the Hasidic communities, Hasidim, and Hasidic communities, this is really the day they remember that too. And that's because it's a day on which a lot of things happen, which I'll talk about in a moment. So it starts with a tradition of, for 3 weeks, you begin to ease into this period of mourning. Period begins on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz, which was exactly 3 weeks ago. And that was associated with the first breach of the walls of Jerusalem. The holiday itself is timed to what, at least traditionally, is thought to have been the day, the exact date on which both the first temple in Jerusalem and the second temple in Jerusalem were destroyed. Now, we don't really have any evidence that the first temple was destroyed that day, but the Bible claims it was. We do have evidence that around that date, the Romans did destroy the second temple. That was in 70 CE. So they're quite a distance apart, the two. But as you may know, by the time that temple was destroyed, the first time, in 586 BCE, anybody remember by whom? Nebuchadnezzar. That was more detail than I thought we'd get. Who was he? What band did he play for? Who was it? Not the Assyrians, no. The Chaldeans, which is a fancy word for the Neo-Babylonians. You got that one. Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you I don't have my hearing aids in. Babylonians, Sandy got it too. The Chaldeans you'll see sometimes because that's what the latter Babylonian kingdom was called, Chaldea in some places. So, no, the Assyrians actually had already in the year 722 BCE, had already destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, which was the far larger kingdom. And by the time that they made their way down south, they were close to destroying Jerusalem. And in fact, they had destroyed almost everything but Jerusalem. And if Jerusalem had not been saved, not through the miracle that the Bible records, but through probably some luck that the Assyrians had other fish to fry, and some good planning by a king who built good solid walls and also rerouted the water supply, and that's absolutely 100% archaeologically verified, both of those things, although it's not what we're actually talking about tonight. So that's what, and his name was Hezekiah, and he did these things. If you've ever gone to Israel and walked through Hezekiah's tunnel, that's the water outlet. So this, though, observes or mourns the destruction of that first temple. So for 3 weeks, this intensified period of mourning happens, where most traditional Jews refrain from eating meat. I saw one of the local kosher restaurants had a whole Av menu, Tisha B'Av menu. And particularly the 9 days beginning with Rosh Chodesh, or the first of the month of Av, that's when the intensity of the mourning continues. Some men don't shave, some people don't launder clean clothing. It can be a rather pungent holiday. All right, so we're going to look at these texts together at the origins of these holidays. And we're going to start with a text from the Mishnah. That's the oldest Jewish code of law. It is the seed of the Talmud, if you were. The Talmud consists of the discussions and debates about the verses, the writings of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was codified in 200 CE. So we know that Tisha B'Av goes back at least that far and a little bit more. So we're actually going to, just for the sake of time, I gave you the front text there at the bottom of page 1, but turn to page 2, because we're going to read an interpretive translation of this that I found, that given the the number of texts that I want to read, we'll read this. The Mishnah text itself is a little bit more pithy, but it says basically this: there were 5 events that occurred on the 9th of Av, which, and parenthetically, he adds, besides Yom Kippur is the only major fast on the Jewish calendar. There are other fasts do exist. Some of them are by community. Some of them are by tradition, Ashkenazim versus Sephardim. Some Hasidic groups, they do it for this Rebbe or that Rebbe. But those are sun up. In other words, they're from dawn to sundown, which means that you can get up real early and have breakfast, and that really and your coffee, and that makes the day a lot more palatable. So what are the 5 things that the ancient rabbis thought happened on the 9th of Av? 1, after the people of Israel believed the bad report of the 10 spies over that of Joshua and Caleb, God decreed that no one over the age of 20 would make it into the land of Canaan. You remember that story? This is Moses sends spies into the land after it's already been somewhat scouted, and these spies come back talking about giants in Canaan. And they make everybody very, very afraid. The tradition, not the Torah, teaches that no one over the age of 20 was going to live then to come into the land. That's not in the Torah, but the spy story is. Number 2 thing that supposedly happened, excuse me, there's a dry throat from singing, it's not anything else. That both temples were destroyed, as we just discussed, the first in 586 BCE, the second by the Romans in 70 CE. The first temple was set aflame on the 9th and burnt on the 10th. And that's attested in 3 or 4 different books of the Bible. Not all of them have the date, not all of them have the same date, But I will tell you, it is known to be an historical event. There's no question about it. In Israel, there are several artifacts that you can go visit. One is this wall that had been built originally by that king I mentioned about 150 years earlier. And carbon dating, excuse me, it was that Ma Tovu. I got a frog in my throat, it wouldn't leave. I went into this place called the Israelite Tower. Now, for a tower, you actually have to go underground to see it. And the burn marks all over it are dated to the 580s BCE, give or take. That's carbon dating. There are arrowheads found at the bottom of where the wall would have been in the ground. So this is absolutely known to have happened. Whether or not it happened on the 9th of Av, we don't know. And then they named two other dates. Beitar, an important Jewish stronghold during the Bar Kokhba revolt, fell to the Romans. Anybody remember where that was? This guy knows his Jewish history. This was a second revolt. After the second temple was already destroyed, they got it into their heads now, 60 years later, hey, it went so well the first time when we revolted against the Romans, let's do that again. And it was a terrible idea, because the destruction that took place in 7D by the Romans still left the Jews occupying Jerusalem and in the land, in those central areas of the land. But after this revolt, they were slaughtered. Genuinely credible evidence that up to 1 million Jews died. That's really what emptied out the land. Jews were already living in the diaspora. From there on, the major Jewish presence in the land was in the Galilee, a small group of rabbis up there, and the rest of the Jews who were in diaspora in Babylon, where many had stayed, and in Egypt and Greece and in Rome and in Asia Minor and Northern Africa. That became the basis of the Jewish community, primarily Babylon. Then, after there was one more. On the 9th of Av, it said that following that Bar Kokhba revolt, the Romans razed the temple to the ground. And they put in its place a temple to Jupiter. And that was the end of our presence there in Jerusalem. So what happens on Tisha B'Av? Well, as I mentioned, it's a day of fast, and it's a day of fast analogous to Yom Kippur in what the practices are. So this next text here is from the Babylonian Talmud. The sages taught, all mitzvot, meaning commandments, all commandments practiced by a mourner are likewise practiced on the 9th of Av. So what are those things? It's prohibited, of course, to engage in eating or drinking. That's just like Yom Kippur. In smearing oil on your body. I know you all are thinking, when do I ever smear oil on my body? But you do. You put perfume on and you shower. And this was how they did soap. So you can't bathe, is what it's saying. There's no bathing. In wearing shoes, they do wear shoes, but wearing leather shoes, nice leather shoes. You can wear, they wear sneakers is what they wear primarily. Have you ever been to a traditional Yom Kippur? Some of you have noticed maybe that the rabbi and some other people are wearing sneakers. I used to wear, when I was traditional, I had the vegan shoes, right? The fake leather and so forth, because I didn't want to look like a schlepper on the bimah. And the other thing that you have to refrain from is conjugal relations. So there's no monkey business. I guess with monkeypox out, I shouldn't say that. There's no funny business on Tisha B'Av or on Yom Kippur. It is also, and this may interest you, it's forbidden to read from the Torah, from the prophetic sections of the Bible and from the writings, or to study the Mishnah, from the Talmud, from Midrash, and from the collection of legal material, and from the collection of Agadot, lore. Why do you think this is? Why was it forbidden to read from those things? Why do you think? They give pleasure. That's exactly right. For them, this gave them pleasure. First of all, it was, they didn't have a lot of sources of entertainment, and reading these stories and talking about them was a kind of way of entertaining yourself. Other rabbis came along and said, you can read certain sections as long as they're really difficult sections that make you struggle. So that was a little way around it. But yes, it's because they give you pleasure. The oldest source that we have, and now we're going to page 3, and then we'll have some discussion about all this as we get to the end. The oldest source that we have on this is from actually a book that we're now reading on our Saturday class. We just started. It's the last of the books we're going to read. We started, that group and I, before the pandemic, like 5 minutes before the pandemic started, we began reading the book of Joshua, which follows the Torah. We've made it all the way through to this one, where we're now starting. We're basically at the beginning of this one. It's the book of 2 Kings, which is the whole history of the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, how Israel disappeared off the face of the earth, and how Judah managed to hang on to 586, and then finally they were gone. And Nebuchadnezzar was the right answer, and we're going to read what the Tanakh, the Bible, the Hebrew Scripture says about it. On the 7th day of the 5th month, that is Av, remember the months as we count them start with Nisan in Passover. Rosh Hashanah comes in the middle of the year because it's a birthday. It's the birthday of the world. That's when God made the world, right? So I'm not talking science, I'm talking Bible. So, you know, you celebrate your birthday in the middle and then your new year starts. That was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, an officer of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, Yahweh, the temple, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down the house of every notable person. The entire Chaldean, Babylonian force that was with the chief of the guard tore down the walls of Jerusalem on every side. The remnant of the people that was left in the city, the defectors who had gone over to the king of Babylon, and the remnant of the population were taken into exile by Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards. But some of the poorest in the land were left by the chief of the guards to be vine dressers and field hands. The Chaldeans broke up the bronze columns of the house of Yahweh, the stands, the things that they put the sacrifices on and so forth, and the bronze tank that was in the house of Yahweh, and they carried it all the way to Babylon. They took all the valuables. They just ripped it all down, and they destroyed the whole temple. So this is considered to be an enormous tragedy. How did we survive this? We actually survived this because of the Babylonians. We're here today because of the Babylonians, because they had this weird custom, this weird way of conquering people. You've heard of the 10 tribes of Israel, right? The 10 lost tribes? They were primarily the tribes that inhabited the northern kingdom of Israel, and they're gone. They're all gone. They were dispersed. Assyria, who conquered them in the 720s BCE, had a policy: we deport everyone, we bring new people in, and then the people we deported we send to other lands, and they can never be found again. And that's what they did. The Babylonians had a very strange way of conquering people. They would bring the peoples to their land, and they would allow their officials to have a court in exile, including their priests and everything else. And then some of the people were enslaved, some were not, some were eventually allowed to build lives there. And because of this segregation, because they were building, as it were, a menagerie of cultures, the Jews survived. It was really, it's thought to be a miracle by Jews today who are believers, but it was really a quirk of history. We are here because of so many little quirks, so many little accidental things. Look, we as human beings are here because of so many little accidental things, right, too. But this is a case of historical decisions by human beings that happen to have benefited us here and there. In fact, a lot of us believe, scholars today, that the Torah was compiled in Babylon, that many of the other books were edited for the last time, or maybe at least some midpoint. In any case, it was within 80, 90, 100 years or so that the Persians moved to the west, took over Babylon, and ultimately said to the Jews, Cyrus the Great, you can go home. Now, most of them did not go home. Thank goodness. Because after what happened with the Romans hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, if every Jew had been in Israel, that would have been the end of the Jews again. But they didn't. They set up what became the largest Jewish community in the world in Babylon. Where's Babylon today? What country is it? Iraq. Sadly, this Jewish community, the oldest Jewish community in the world, from 586 BCE, survived there and flourished there until, any guesses? 1949, 50, 51, but yes, when they were expelled as a result of the creation of the state of Israel. The oldest Jewish community on earth. Where that's why we call our Talmud, our major Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. That's where it came from. It's why it's in Aramaic. That was the lingua franca of the region, including Babylon. There was a remnant. There were remnants everywhere. But the Assyrians, when they came to get us, they didn't bring anybody back and allow them to be Jews. And also it happened earlier in history when it wasn't clear at all that the Israelites were monotheists, for one, and they may have done what other peoples did. When you moved to a land, you took on their god. And anyway, the Bible, particularly 1 Kings and most of 2 Kings, is all about how terrible the north was, how disobedient they were. In reality, archaeology reveals that they were like everybody else. Yahweh was their main God, but he wasn't the only God that they believe existed. And Yahweh sort of moved up the scale of gods to become the most powerful in the world and then the only in the world. And we're not exactly sure where that happened, but it seems safe to say it was sometime between the destruction of the north, gone forever, and the destruction of the south. And now the south, Judah, has this God, and they bring this God with them to Babylon because it's portable now. If it's the God of the universe or God of the world, that means it's the God of the world whether in Babylon or anywhere else. So we think that that was really a moment, maybe not a moment, but a period of transition from the monotheism of the north, from the polytheism of the north and south, following the destruction of the north, a slow climb towards monolatry, which is sort of Yahweh's the best, even though there's other gods. And then finally, Yahweh's it. And the Yahweh is it, you can see it in the book of Deuteronomy, which is traditional synagogues being started on this Shabbat. They're beginning to read it. And chapter 6, some of you know it. It goes, Shema, Hear, O Israel, meaning now all of Israel, because Israel becomes the name that's assumed by everyone, particularly when the northern kingdom's lost. Hear, O Israel, we're all Israel. Yahweh alone is our God. Yahweh is the only God. And we think that that's really a monotheistic statement. There's arguments, but that's what we think. In any case, this was perceived as a major tragedy, and it is reflected in some incredible texts in the Bible that I just want to share with you real briefly. So here's one that is recited on this holiday, on this day of observance, that you might be familiar with. It in Hebrew starts Al Naharot Bavel Sham Yashavnu Gam Bechinu Bizochrenu Et Zion. I'm sorry, the bottom of 3. Bottom of 3. Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. Zion being a synonym for the land of Israel. Particularly Mount Zion, which is in the center of Jerusalem, just down the street from, right at the bottom of 3. There on the poplars we hung up our lyres, our song, our harps. For our captors asked us there, songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of Yahweh, of the Lord, Adonai, I guess they would have said, on alien soil? And now one of the most famous verses in the Bible. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue stick to my palate, if I cease to think of you, if I do not keep Jerusalem in memory even at my happiest hour. So this, of course, permeates Jewish tradition today. Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds and hundreds of times in the Bible. You can certainly understand why it's important to all three religions, because the other two, of course, came from Judaism. Now, the picture here is an illustration of how people observe this holiday. So the holiday is observed by a service, a normal service, a quiet weekday night service, and people sit on benches that are overturned or usually just on the floor. The lighting is frequently dimmed. Sometimes candles are used. I've been in services, particularly in conservative reform temples, where candles are used. This idea of Tisha B'Av, by the way, made a big comeback in the reform movement in the 1980s. I was part of that, part of pushing for that. I think I was one of the first groups of summer campers at the Reform Quds camp of blessed memory that insisted upon observing Tisha B'Av. And a lot of the rabbis there did not like that we were doing that, because they were Reform Jews and we already have Israel and we don't need to mourn it anymore. And now it is all over the Reform movement. So I was a trendsetter and then I left because they were doing those things. So they on the ground, they chant these things, and among the things that they chant, the most important thing is the Book of Lamentations. So we've seen the Book of 2 Kings, and we've seen the Book of Psalms. Now we see the Book of Lamentations. This is what we call like an elegy. It's a mournful poem. And the Hebrew is mostly there for me, so you can turn the page. We're not going to read the whole thing, but I want you to get a sense of it. So first of all, I'm going to chant it for you. I'm going to kind of mess up the chanting because I haven't done this in a while. I can chant the Torah with I can still remember. You won't know the difference, but it's for posterity on YouTube. Echa yashva badad ha'ir rabatiyam hayta kalmana rabati v'goyim sarat b'midinot hayta lamas. You can hear the mournful quality to it. That's not too far off from how it actually goes, although if anybody watches on YouTube, they'll probably send me a letter. What are they saying? Alas, lonely sits the city, once great with people. She that was great among nations has become like a widow. The princess among states has become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Judah has gone into exile. That's the southern kingdom. Because of misery and harsh oppression, when she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh. Her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate. Her enemies are now the masters. If you go to verse 7 on the right column in the middle, all the precious things she had in the days of old, Jerusalem recalled in her days of woe and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. Jerusalem has greatly sinned, therefore she has become a mockery. All who admired her despise her, for they have seen her disgraced, and she can only sigh and shrink back. So this begins the idea. It's a metaphor for the city. The way we do with countries, we often say she, or a boat will assign the pronoun she. That's it. It's just a poeticism, and it does carry over into English in some things. This really does give you a sense of how horrible people felt, but it also begins the idea that Jerusalem in 586 BCE fell because of our sins. And this is a repeating element. We find this in every Jewish liturgy. It's either lightly mentioned in some or it's heavily mentioned in others. On the high holidays, particularly Yom Kippur, when we're doing this, which we don't do here, but when they do this, it's called, and we say the al chetz, for the sin that I have committed. Al chetz shechatanu lifanecha, all those. There's other verses that say, Mipnei chataeinu galinu me'artzeinu, because of our sins we were exiled from our land. And this kind of self-blame becomes a very strong strand. In the case of the first temple, The idea is that they weren't observing the mitzvahs, that they were constantly rebelling against God. We're going to see in the case of the Second Temple, it was different, and in some ways, and this is the question for tonight, more relevant to our lives. In addition to this, they chant what they call keynote or kinos. And these are poems that were written to do the same thing. And we'll just look at some of them just very quickly. Here's one that I found in the middle of page 6, actually kind of more towards the top, where it says text, keynote for Tisha B'Av. Remember, O Lord, what has occurred to us. Alas, look and see our disgrace. Alas, what has occurred to us. Our property has been handed over to strangers, alas. And by the way, the last is oy lanu, oy lanu, oy lanu. That's a very important kind of sound poetically that really, what do you say when something goes wrong or bad? We say oy, right? It's very old. It's very old in Judaism and in Hebrew. Here's another one. This one is actually an acrostic, which is why I left those little Hebrew letters in it. But you can see that this idea of sin on our parts continues. How long will there be crying in Zion and eulogies in Jerusalem? Have compassion for Zion and build the walls of Jerusalem. Then for our sins the sanctuary was destroyed, and for our violations the temple building was burnt. On earth they gathered to her, compiling a eulogy, and the host of the heavens raised a lament. How long? And these go on for a long time. The book is really thick. And they chant it well, they got nothing else to do. You're not supposed to go and put on the TV. Although I know some Orthodox Jews who do. So as I mentioned, if you turn the page, over time, this becomes a day of universal mourning. And there were other horrible events that either actually happened on Tisha B'Av, and in some cases we know they did, or were attributed to Tisha B'Av. So here's a few examples. The declaration of the First Crusade, it's not at all clear that it happened exactly on Tisha B'Av, but it happened in Av in 1095. The First Crusade was a horror for the Jewish people in Europe. Because as this group of all, what I'm trying to say, pumped up on religion, as they marauded through Europe, they attacked Jewish communities right and left. Lacking any Muslims to kill until they got further east, they took it out on Jews. And we don't know the exact numbers, but there are written accounts. Some of them we looked at in a Monday night class, for those of you who were with me a few years ago. There are firsthand accounts of parents actually killing their children before the Crusaders got to them, and comparing themselves, as it were, to Abraham, who did not sacrifice Isaac, at least in the story we have, but was prepared to for the sake of God. And so they were doing it really for the sake of their children in some ways too. Some of these stories are horrible. I remember reading them for the very first time, and it was worse, as bad as anything you heard from the Holocaust. All that was lacking in difference was the technology. In 1290, the English Edict of Expulsion, that actually did take place on Tisha B'Av. That's documented. The French Edict of Expulsion, some 16 years later, in 1306, was enforced for the first time on the 10th of Av, so the next day. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain was quite purposefully declared by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinando. That's not his name. I'm kidding. That's the ABBA song. I was waiting to see if anybody was going to laugh. That was purposely declared because they knew that the day that Tisha B'Av was the day of Jewish mourning, and that's the day that the edict was issued. Ferdinand. Yes, indeed. Well, and there were Jews. There were Jews on the ships who were escaping. Things had been bad for a while. But in 1492, around there, we have the Reconquista, which is the final, in a several hundred-year war, the final conquest of Spain by Christendom. And that's when they now have the power to do this, and they're done fighting the Muslims. Terrible, terrible. The approval of the final solution took place on the 9th of Av in 1941, or was issued on the 9th of Av. The Warsaw Ghetto deportation commenced on the 9th of Av in 1941. Those are all documented. The Nazis were absolutely aware of the significance of that day. And I'll tell you a story from my own extended family, not really my family, my kids' family though, so I've taken them into my hearts with my own, as our service says. This is my former wife's family. They were in a small town called Ivia in what was then Poland, but is now Belarus, not very far from Vilnius, or Vilna, as the Jews called it. And after the events of the Operation Barbarossa, when the Nazis broke their agreement with the Soviet Union and flooded into that part of Poland that the Russians were already in, and swept the Russians out. Because remember, the Russians and the Nazis had divided Poland, but after Barbarossa, they just went in, got the rest of Russia, and then on the rest of Poland, and then on to Russia. So they were on that side. And as it happens, my former father-in-law survived the Holocaust because he and his brothers were drafted into the Red Army while it was still under Russian rule, but his wife, who was pregnant, was not. His parents, who made the biggest error in the history of her family by moving to America in the early 1900s and moving back, which nobody did because they had the means to do so when they wanted to be more traditional. They were all slaughtered at one point or another. But the worst of it began on Tisha B'Av. And I used to think this was maybe a family legend they were telling until I got my hands on some of the memory books, the Yizkor books. Every town that had survivors published these. And there was the story right there. 225 of the leaders of the town were taken out, dug a trench, and were shot by the Einsatzgruppen, collapsed into the trench. The rest were shortly thereafter deported, and his wife and their now born child, the child was now an infant, died in a ghetto. Interestingly, my ex-wife's family did not know this story until the mid-1980s, when my father-in-law, of blessed memory, opened up like a fountain spout in Jerusalem on the eve of Passover, and finally told us the story. It's the amount of mourning and pain, but Tisha B'Av was for them even worse. The idea that we are mourning for all of these things, and that this sort of cruel circle of events has provided more things to mourn for on that day, that created a sort of a feedback loop. But there were plenty of Jews who rejected the mourning of Tisha B'Av. Many of them were people like us who are no longer mourning the temple, or who have other outlets for mournings, for instance, the Holocaust with Holocaust Memorial Day. In fact, there's two. There's International Holocaust Memorial Day in January, and there's the one that the Israelis and most of the Jewish community, like we do, observe in May, just after Passover. There were people who, like early Reformed Jews, had no desire ever to return. There were Zionists who said, no, they didn't want to go back. They wanted to stay in diaspora, those Reformed Jews, in the early 1900s, 1800s. Or there were Zionists who, after the creation of Israel, said, what are we mourning for? We're here. And in fact, there were legends and teachings in the Talmud and elsewhere that said, when the temple is rebuilt, Tisha B'Av will become the happiest day of the year. And of course, there are fanatics who would like nothing more than to see that happen, and as we know, have from time to time been arrested, most notoriously in the 1980s, when a group of terrorists, Jewish terrorists, were arrested for a plot to bomb the Dome of the Rock and bring down the Temple Mount that's holy now to the Muslims as well. All right, so I want to turn now, we have a little bit of time, to the last story, and this one we're going to read through. Yeah. Well, I mean, remember when I gave the class on anti-Semitism? So what was going on there? What was going on is that the people hated the Jews. We were the only other there. There was no other. There was no community of black people or, yes. But the popes consistently condemned the harming of the Jews, the physical harm of the Jews. They had a policy that you leave the Jews to suffer so that you can see what happens to people who reject the Christ. And there were plenty of Jews who converted, by the way, and became enemies of the Jews after they did so. How do you think Ferdinand and Isabella knew what the 9th of Av was? Because they had people who were involved in the Inquisition, which was aimed at Jews who had converted to Christianity, who were informers, and many others. They hated us because we were, and remember the charge of deicide. The New Testament is a very anti-Jewish text. There are parts of it that are less anti-Jewish, but all of it as a whole is pretty anti-Jewish. And you have portions of it, because remember, this was written by early Jews or Gentiles who had accepted this Jewish guy as their guy, and they were fighting against Jews who had rejected this Jewish guy as their guy. And so as time progressed, the earliest gospel is only written, is 70 years Jesus is dead before the first gospel is written, and 120, 130 years later, the last gospel is written. It's the most anti-Semitic, the most anti-Jewish. And what is the proposal there? That not only did the Jews kill him, but they were given an opportunity to save him, and they said, no, save that guy, the thief, Barabbas, right? And give us Barabbas, this horrible criminal, and kill this guy. That's how terrible we were. So the charge of deicide is hard to get around. Anyway, back to our people and our story. So the rabbis asked a question, and it's related to this idea that it was our sins that brought down the temples. In the Bible, it is recorded that the Jews, or the people who were living in Judah, eventually that's where Jews came from, that's where the name came from, and we are also the people of Israel, not just the name of a country, it's the name of our people, that it was their lack of loyalty to God. It was their polytheism, and they're continually falling back and worshiping foreign gods that brought that temple down. But there was no evidence and no memory of anything like that in the Second Temple period. By the Second Temple period, and many of the rabbis, the early rabbis, were witnesses to the destruction of the temple, lived before it, during it, and after it. This was not their fight. This was not the thing that was going on. And so they said, well, this is our fault somehow. What was it? Well, there was something going on at that time. It was enormous sectarianism. Jews were divided into all kinds of sects based upon religious approaches in some cases. For instance, the crew down at Masada, the Essenes as we call them, they had a whole different way of doing it. The rabbinical group, which ultimately did become the central way of doing Judaism, even what we humanistic Jews do, is based upon the rabbinical template. All of our texts, all of our holidays are how the rabbis dictated they happen. Even if we're changing them from what they did. There were the priests who had a whole industry going on top of the temple, apparently very corrupt sometimes. And there were zealots who wanted to kill all the Romans who started the war. And there were other groups too. Some of you saw with me years ago, I showed it, The Life of Brian, right? You remember that scene where they're at they go to the Roman, what do you call those things? Right, we're at the Colosseum and they're watching the lions and everything. And they start arguing about, oh, those horrible People's Front for Liberation Judah, oh, we hate them, splitter. And and finally they get back, oh yeah, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Judah. Wait, that's us. That was actually very accurate. I mean, in a funny way, but that's how sectarian things had become. So now this is about 200-300 years later. And the rabbis are sitting around. This is clearly in Babylon, around, let's say, 135, 150 CE. And the Talmud is coming together, and they tell this story. It's a really interesting story, and I think it's a good one for us to end with and have some conversation about. It's a story about what they call sinat chinam, baseless hatred. We're on page 9. And it is a parable, really, about this sectarianism, about people hating each other and not even remembering why they hate each other so much anymore. And it has some really interesting parallels to the Jewish community today. Page 9 at the top. The Gemara, the Talmud, explains, here's why Jerusalem was destroyed. That's the question. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Two people, one named Kamsa and one named Bar Kamsa. Has anybody heard this story before? A really cool story. There was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa, and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go, bring me my friend Kamsa." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa. The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamsa said to him, "I'll give you money. I'll pay for half the feast. Just do not send me away." Why? Why wouldn't he leave? It's embarrassing. He was invited to this party, albeit by accident, and now he's being publicly shamed and told to leave. He was feeling the shame so much, he said, "I'll pay for half the feast. Just do not send me away." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamsa then said to him, "I'll give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay." The host said to him, "No, you leave." Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand. I think it was more like probably by his wrist, right? Stood him up and took him out. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, "Since the sages were sitting there," in other words, there were rabbis at this feast, "since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of their host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king." So what did the Jewish leadership do when they witnessed the spectacle? They did nothing. They sat there, silently taking sides, because they silently assented to the exile from the party of poor Bar Kamsa. Look, we don't know why they're enemies, and that's part of the point of the story, that there was so much divisiveness. And yet, who let it continue? The leaders. And in fact, the leaders were complicit in it. And he saw that. And what does he do? Something just as bad. He goes and informs on these people to the Romans. Now, the story is being written and spoken of around 150, but it's taking place around 67, 68, 69 CE. Always important to remember that. And what does he do? He goes to the emperor and he basically starts the war. He goes to the emperor and he says, "The Jews have rebelled against you." The emperor said to him, "Who says this is the case?" So Bar Kamsa is going to trap the Jewish community. This is going to be, what do they call that? Entrapment. Bar Kamsa said to him, "Go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they will sacrifice it." So it was common that the government or other visitors to town or officials who were not Jewish would honor the Jewish community by purchasing an animal to be brought to the priests in Jerusalem to properly sacrifice as a celebration of friendship or on their behalf in some way. This wasn't out of the question. People did this. It was done all over the world because animal sacrifice was one of the prime ways that people worshipped. It's really the only way that people worshipped. And so the emperor is being challenged. Go ahead and send them a sacrifice. See what they do with it. So the emperor went and sent with Bar Kamsa, a choice 3-year-old calf. The best, that's really like the best of all the sacrifices you could spend. It's the most expensive animal that you can sacrifice. While Bar Kamsa was coming, and by the way, 3.5 years old is really not a calf. It's a bull. When Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. He did a little slit with a knife or something. That's a problem because the Torah says you can't sacrifice an animal that has a blemish in it like that. You can't do it. Some say he made the blemish on its eyelids, a place where according to our laws it's a blemish, but according to their laws, with the Gentile rules for their offerings, it's not a blemish. That's just a little side, two people, arguing about what the story says. But in any case, Bar Kamsa makes the sacrifice unacceptable. Now, the emperor doesn't know this. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished, but they could also not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who didn't consider it to be blemished or didn't know what the hell the Jews were talking about. This wasn't their way of doing sacrifices. They were fine with this particular blemish. Whatever it is, it was gibberish to them. And how then does it appear to the emperor? It's an insult. They're rejecting my gift. A gift of an animal like this. Remember, these animals went to feed the priests. This was a gift. Why they call it a sacrifice, it's expensive. The blemish notwithstanding, though, the rabbis, the sages, finally, they wake up, wanted to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. Now, they don't know Bar Kamsa's behind this, but in accord with their wanting to not be trouble, we don't need more trouble with the Romans, that was their stance, and it was their stance. They were against this war. They said, take it. But one rabbi said to them, this fellow, Zechariah ben Avkolas, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals can be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. In other words, you make an exception here, everybody's going to want to do it. Right? They set a precedent. The sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. Can't let him out again. The sages suggested killing him so that he would not go and speak against them and report them. Think about what the sages have now done. So now they have engaged in turning a blind eye to an injustice caused by baseless hatred, and they have argued rightly that we should take the sacrifice so this thing doesn't escalate into a diplomatic war. But only one stands up and says, nope, you do that, you're going to have to do it for everybody. They let him get away with it. Oh, yeah, you're right. It'll set a precedent. It's no good. Let's just kill Bar Kamsa. Obstruction of justice. This is a major scandal. And we'll just finish this out. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed. So you're going to have to explain why he died, and you don't have a good explanation. You can't say it was because of this whole thing with the emperor, because that all started with you keeping your mouth shut. And finally, as a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Many, many years later, Rabbi Yochanan, who is part of this conversation, says, the excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. What did he mean by that? The religious fanaticism of Zechariah ben Avkolas. But in fact, it wasn't just that. Do you see parallels to any situations that are going on today? What are your thoughts on this? I'm just curious. Yeah, anybody? Think about the Jewish world that we live in. Let's look at the Jews. The Jews are unbelievably divided. Somebody called me this week, and this was a part of the political division, although it's not major in this country, it exists, calling me a communist. 3 times they called me a communist. I have to tell you, I don't know enough about communists to be a to be a communist. I would fail any test they want to give me. Is there communism anymore? I don't know. But I will tell you, I'm not a communist. I don't know any of the songs. I haven't read any of the books. But this is baseless hatred. What he was talking about was Black Lives Matter and everything else, and social justice. The Jews are divided on these things. Israel is a very right-wing country. American Jews are considerably more left-wing, almost overwhelmingly so outside the Jewish community, outside the Orthodox Jewish community. And even there's a division between the more woke people and the less woke people. Right. Well, but yeah. Okay, Fran. Yeah, Fran and Sandy. Yeah, he calls himself a Zionist, president of synagogue, mezuzahs all over his house. Yep. Yep. Sinat Chinam. Sandy. The cover-up is there, yes. Yeah, this obstruction of justice and the cover-up, but it all starts because we want to own the libs, right? Or we hate that group of people. Now, listen, I'm a person who's had a lot of anger at what's going on. There's no question about it. And I struggle with this. That's why I could not talk about this Christian nationalism. I will be talking about it in August, whatever it is, August 26th. I will return to it. But I needed a break because my blood is boiling. Well, I can sort of understand. I don't know why they hated each other, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, but I suppose if, a certain kind of person showed up to my feast, although if he offered to pay for it, I might feel differently. I wonder, though, would I want to sit down and have a conversation or a reconciliation? Would you? Say? At least talk. I didn't want to talk to the person who called me a communist. I don't know. I didn't really want to get into it. And I didn't feel that there was going to be any opening for that. I felt that I was going to receive a lecture. And so I decided not to invite him to my feast. But if he had shown up, I guess I would have tried to be human with him, although I was a little bit afraid, too. That some of those folks sometimes carry firearms. I didn't know the gentleman. This is the Jewish world we're living in, and this is the real larger world we're living in. I think that this is, despite the fact that it's a parable and it's a made-up story, is probably one of the best explanations I've ever heard for how the Second Temple fell. Because the documented sectarianism there was so powerful. And let's just draw it into just the Jewish community. Let's talk about things that we agree on across the Jewish community, where Orthodox Jews do agree with us on some things. Some of them are very, very upset at the narrow-mindedness of other Orthodox Jews. The spectacle of a young woman, a 13-year-old girl, celebrating her bat mitzvah 2 weeks ago at the Western Wall and being surrounded by Haredim, harassing her, throwing things at them, spitting on and tearing prayer books, Reform, conservative, I don't know what they were, stamping on them. Those prayer books contain the same holy name of God that they see in another book and they reverence. But they have no trouble stamping on them there. That's the kind of thing that concerns me in the Jewish community. I am encouraged that there are Orthodox Jews who do increasingly accept other Jews as well, or at least don't seek harassment. And we have models of that. We have a model right here in our own community. There's a new synagogue that was started by Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who came to Detroit to serve as the head of the JCRC, is an Orthodox rabbi who headed up a yeshiva that ordained women to serve the Orthodox Jewish community, as they weren't calling them rabbis, but some of them are called rabbis in their communities, but within Jewish law, within the constrictures of Jewish law, who showed up at our abortion rally and spoke about pluralism, spoke about humanistic Jews, established a small synagogue in Huntington Woods where he lives. He's like my family who are Orthodox. It can be done. The Jewish world is too small. There are maybe 13, 14 million of us left. Our numbers have not matched those of 1939 yet, in a world that is much, much more populated. So while this can be seen as sort of a big national thing for the United States, I prefer to look at it as an issue for the Jewish world. There are too many things that we argue about, like blemishes on the eyelid or the lip of a cow, that split us into pieces, that create sectarian hatred. And I, for one, would love to see it come to an end. I am the most pluralistic Jew on earth, and I'm going to take credit for that. There are others that are just as pluralistic as me, because I love all Jews no matter what they do, as long as they do it out of chesed, loving kindness. You know, it's my family situation, and I love my children dearly. You know that I give them blessings in the name of Yahweh from Sherwin's office on Friday night. This is what the Jewish community needs. I'm not the only one. When we can reach out, when we can not look at their customs and say they're stupid or silly or what have you, but make an attempt to understand. And when they can then, as Rabbi Lopatin does, reciprocate and say, humanistic Jews are part of our community too, I think that's when we'll see the people of Israel flourishing again. So that's Tisha B'Av. Thank you guys for participating in our little study session. Thanks. And, good, it's good timing. All right, I'm gonna make my way back up here. Anybody else have any comments? All right, good, we've got a song about peace. And this one's in Hebrew and in Arabic, so it fits. Even though I think I selected it before we changed the topic. All right, Maestro.
Od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam. Shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Oribo shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Salam, salam, aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam. Shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, Oribo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, David, for running the YouTube. Arthur for running the slides. Shabbat shalom, everybody. no, you can keep those.